Hello, thank you for being with us for the truth about apportionment. Maybe you don't know what apportionment means, but we're here with Nowell Francis, an author and an expert on apportionment, who wrote a book, Reclaiming the People's House, about apportionment in the United States Congress. Nowell, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and why you wrote this book?
Thank you, Steve. I formed Depot Pond Publishing almost 10 years ago. The purpose of Depot Pond Publishing is for me to self-publish books about topics that once were very, very important and are now very rarely discussed. And the goal of my books is to try to create a national dialogue about various topics. The second book that I wrote was about the topic of apportionment, which during the early years of our country and up to the year 1912 was very much front and center in the public eye. Congress worked on apportionment all the time, and since 1912 the issue has been largely forgotten. And I hope to go into the reasons why apportionment is still important today, and why we should be paying attention to this topic of a very important topic.
Okay. So can you explain exactly what apportionment is?
Well, I think the simplest way to describe it is to think of a pie, an apple pie or a pumpkin pie, and you'll see the whole pie, and you'll slice the pie, or the slicing of the pie into pieces that you can eat is apportioning the pie. For legislative bodies, every legislative body starts with the whole, like the pie is started as a whole. And apportionment is the process of dividing up the legislature so that to determine the size of the district that an individual representative has, and also the shape of that district.
So it's supposed to be proportional.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
And how is the United States Congress apportioned?
Well, the apportionment of the United States Congress today is that since 1912 there have been 435 seats, and what what happens is that those 435 seats have to be divided up among the states, and there are states of various sizes and various populations. But what you start out with are 435 seats. And the way the Constitution was written is that bigger states like California and Texas, they get proportionately more seats than mid-sized states like Massachusetts and small states like Wyoming. Under the Constitution, every single state is guaranteed at least one seat in the House of Representatives, and there are 7 or 8 states that have just one representative because of their small population. And then as the state is bigger and bigger, there are more and more people.
Okay, you said in your book that the apportionment of the United States House of Representatives is the least representative among democracies in the world?
Yes. Yes, in fact, it's even less representative than in authoritarian regimes like Russia. In the Duma in Russia, there's actually one representative to the Duma who represents about 400,000 people. But among democracies like Canada and Brazil and the United Kingdom and Germany, the United States, a representative to the House of Representatives represents far more people than representatives in those countries, and it's really startling. In Canada, you have 41 million people, and there's 343 members of the House of Commons in their parliament, and that's just 120,000 persons per district. In England, the United Kingdom, they actually have more people in their House of Commons, 650 members, than the 435 members of our House of Representatives. And one representative to the House of Commons represents just 102,000 people. Germany, a larger country with 84 million people, they have 630 members of their Bundestag, 133,000 persons per district. Brazil, which is a democracy which is growing larger and is a large democracy, they have 209 million people. They have 513 members of their Chamber of Deputies, and so it's a 408,000 persons per member. The United States, by contrast, is a typical representative, one of the 435 representatives, a typical district size after the 2020 census is 762,000 people. Our representatives in Massachusetts, the average size of their districts are about 781,000 persons. Idaho, a representative represents over 1 million people in the state of Idaho. So, and in Rhode Island, it's a little bit smaller. It's about 600,000 people. But so you can see there's a great variety of sizes. But the average is, it's 762,000 people, which is far, far greater than any other country, any other democracy on earth. And it's a real problem. It's created a lot of the problems that we have today.
And how does apportionment affect neighboring states like Massachusetts and New Hampshire?
Well, Massachusetts and New Hampshire, the difference is really startling. As you know, I'm an official in the town of Templeton, and towns like Templeton are always begging the state legislature for more money, because in Massachusetts, the government, is structured so that it tends to be top down, and in New Hampshire, the government tends to be bottom up. So the local cities and towns in New Hampshire are funded first. And unlike in Massachusetts, where we have to beg for money. And I first became aware of the issue of apportionment. I think if anybody who lives in Massachusetts, if you go shopping, to the Walmart in Rindge or just over the border, what is startling is that you will see maybe 30 or 40% of the cars on any given day are not New Hampshire vehicles, but they're Massachusetts vehicles. And the reason for that is that, residents of Massachusetts, they go to shop in New Hampshire because there's no sales tax. And a large number of Massachusetts residents have fled New Hampshire to live in New Hampshire because they don't have to pay an income tax. But the overall tax percentage of dollars that are paid by individuals is actually the same. And that is because in New Hampshire, you pay a very, very high property tax. One of my friends lived in Rindge, New Hampshire, and he found that although there was no sales or income tax, his property tax was around $10,000 per year. He moved across the border to the neighboring town in Massachusetts of Winchendon, purchased a similar size house, and his taxes were about $3,500 per year, or about $7,000 less than it was in New Hampshire. So the overall tax burden in Massachusetts and New Hampshire is roughly the same. It's just different. And tax dollars in Massachusetts tend to go towards Boston and then be redistributed, while tax dollars in New Hampshire tend to stay in the local cities and towns, and the government is smaller. So why is this? Well, the main reason, when I looked into why are there so many shoppers in New Hampshire, from Massachusetts, and I saw that, and the reason for this is that New Hampshire has the largest House of Representatives in the Western Hemisphere, and possibly in the world. It's larger than any state. They have 400 members of their House of Representatives. Each representative in New Hampshire represents about 3,500 people. And they tend to be ordinary people. They tend to be plumbers and electricians and teachers. They also get paid only $100 a year. And they only meet they only meet for a few days a year or a few months a year. And as a result of this, because they have 400 members, they tend to resist any attempt to tax at the statewide level and keep the money locally. Massachusetts, by contrast, a representative represents 40,000 people, and you've probably seen it if you're a Massachusetts resident. You'll see postcard mailers, which cost thousands of dollars, and you have political action committees for each of the representatives. It might be a teacher's PAC, it might be a firefighter's PAC, but it's some kind of political action committee. And the individual rep needs this because it costs thousands of dollars to run a campaign because they're representing 40,000 people. But it's also reflected in the Massachusetts legislature. Even though they pass the same number of bills per year as the New Hampshire legislature, they're a full-time legislature. They and they also tend to be a lot of lawyers and professional people, and the pay is a lot different than in New Hampshire. Instead of being $100 a year, it's a minimum of $60,000 per year. So all of this is due to the number of legislators, and the reason why Massachusetts is top down is because of the relatively scarce number of legislators. And the reason why New Hampshire is bottom up is because of the huge number of representatives in their House. It was not always that way. There was, at the time of the ratification of the Constitution, there was what was called Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, where Revolutionary War veterans who felt disenfranchised, they tried to take over the arsenal in Springfield. But one of their main grievances was that there were whole towns in Massachusetts that did not have any representation whatsoever. And towns in the Gardner area were among those towns which had no representation in what was called at that time the Great and General Court, no representation whatsoever. Massachusetts, in response to Shays' Rebellion, the people increased the legislature where the House of Representatives had, by 1820, they had 800 people. And since 1820, the number has steadily gone down. The last time the Massachusetts legislature was reapportioned was in 1978. At that time, the legislature, the House of Representatives, had 240 members. What the leadership did was they had a study, which was actually led by a local representative, State Senator Joseph Ward of Fitchburg, who I actually knew. And in 1978, he authored a study, and he determined that to become more efficient, that the Massachusetts legislature should be reduced in size from 240 members to the present 160 members. This was done in part. Mr. Ward was he came of age and was a Democrat during the New Deal era, where the Democrat Party first gained control of the Massachusetts state legislature. And part of his driving motivation was to keep the Massachusetts legislature in the hands of the Democratic Party. That effort was very, very successful, as for decades now the Massachusetts legislature has had a supermajority of Democrats within the state legislature. And it's made it a very efficient body in that they can pass bills very, very quickly as the leadership determines, but it's also a body which I have found as a local official is very frustrating to deal with. If you want something done like a bridge or something in particular for Templeton or Gardner, it's very, very difficult to approach the leadership to do something like that. So it really has, the Democratic Party has maintained control, but is at a price, I think, of individual rights to a certain extent. In New Hampshire, because they still have 400 members, their legislature is a lot closer, I believe, to the people at large.
So the apportionment decisions by both Massachusetts and New Hampshire have had serious consequences.
Yes.
To this day.
Yes, it has.
I may never go over the state line again to do some shopping without thinking of that. I didn't realize that. Usually only concerned about apportionment within my shopping cart.
That's right.
And what's in my wallet.
and that's the problem, is that most people, most Massachusetts residents say, well, great, I can go to New Hampshire and shop. Great, I like to save the money. But they don't realize that apportionment is the reason for that, and that apportionment of the Massachusetts legislature is the reason why we have the sales tax that we do have.
And apportionment also affects our members in the U.S. Congress, correct?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And I think what you see in the U.S. Congress is there's only 435 people, and they tend to be professional politicians. There are very few people who are ordinary people. There are people with business backgrounds, but they might be millionaires or billionaires. But you don't see people like Joe the plumber or an electrician or a school teacher. You see almost none of those ordinary people, and that's not the way it was designed by the framers. It was designed to have frequent turnover of seats. Well, you don't have that, particularly among Democrats. There are literally Democrats in leadership positions in the last 10 years who've literally died in office. You don't have ordinary people. You have professional politicians. It's just a very serious problem, and it's reflected in the legislature that's passed and the priorities of the Congress.
How did apportionment start?
Well, apportionment has been around ever since there were parliaments. Apportionment, as we know it today, started in England. The House of Commons in Parliament. It started in the 1200s, and it started when the kings at that time, they were fighting wars in Scotland and Wales, and they had to raise taxes. And the nobles were reluctant to pay taxes unless they could talk with the king. So what the king would do is that he would go around the countryside, and a couple times a year he would hold what were called parliaments. And there would be a meeting with his nobles to discuss mainly war strategy and how to pay for it. But also included, almost by accident, was with each noble there could be a couple of knights and a couple of merchants called burghers. And in fits and starts over a period of 400 years, the knights increase in number and the merchants increase in number, and over that period of time evolved the House of Commons. So the framers of our Constitution, they drew upon the practices of the House of Commons, and they set the initial size of our Congress based very much on the size of the House of Commons. That was very important to them, and they really followed the example of the English Parliament.
And there's something called the 3/5 rule that came into effect during the framing of our Constitution. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Apportionment was the central issue that the framers argued about. They spent literally weeks and weeks arguing about the composition of the legislative body. So the initial discussion was, should there be what's called a unicameral legislature. In other words, just one legislative body that passes laws, and that's it. But then the smaller states said, well, if you have a unicameral body, we're going to be shut out because the big states are always going to have more representatives to that unicameral body than we will have. So they argued about that for weeks, and then finally they came about with what's called the Great Compromise, which was proposed by Ben Franklin. And the Great Compromise was to guarantee smaller states to have 2 members and the same members as every other state in what became the United States Senate, and that is still true today. A small state in population like Wyoming, with barely 500,000 people in population, they have 2 senators, which is the same number of senators that a state of California with almost 40 million people has. So the U.S. Senate was created to favor smaller states, and to this day it does. The House of Representatives was created to be a proportionate body, and it was created to favor the larger states, and that is also held true today. At the time of the creation of the Constitution in 1787, the 2 larger states were Pennsylvania and Virginia, and they ended up with the most representatives. So the House of Representatives was started out as a proportionate body that favored the larger states. The 3/5 rule was the sticking point, and again, the framers argued about this for weeks on end, the sticking point was what to do about slaves, which are referred to in the Constitution as all other people. The word slavery is never actually mentioned in the Constitution, but it's considered, termed all other people. So the slaveholding states, and states like Virginia and Georgia and North and South Carolina, they wanted their slaves, even though classified as property, they wanted their slaves counted as one whole person. The representatives from non-slaveholding states, or states with few slaves, like Massachusetts or New Hampshire or Pennsylvania, they wanted the slaves not to be counted at all. So after weeks of argument and debate, the ratio of 3/5 was arrived at. So a slave, or all other persons, were valued at 3/5 of a whole person, and this had devastating effects over time. To give an example, in 1787, when the Constitution was created, the framers, when they agreed to the 3/5 rule, even representatives from slaveholding states, they figured that the institution would die off. And they figured it would die off over time and not be a problem into the future. So, and that was not the case. But the 3/5 rule, how it worked was, to give you one example on how it favored slaveholding states was, I can give the example of two states, New Hampshire and South Carolina. In 1787 and in 1790, at the time of the first census, each with the whole number of persons, white males, they had the same number of white males in New Hampshire and in South Carolina. And the apportionment was such that each was entitled to 4 representatives in the House of Representatives. However, South Carolina had 100,000 slaves, and 3/5 of that number is 60,000 slaves. And since the districts at that time were set at being just over 30,000 people, that meant that the 60,000 of the 100,000, 3/5, that meant that that created 2 additional representatives for South Carolina. So New Hampshire had their 4 representatives, and South Carolina had their 6 representatives. It was further magnified when adding up all the slaveholding states. From the very beginning, there were more representatives in the House of Representatives from slaveholding states, because in larger states like Virginia and Pennsylvania, which had similar populations, Virginia always had between 6 and 8 more representatives than a state incomparable in size like Pennsylvania. And when you added up all the representatives, it always consistently meant 20 or 30 or 40 more representatives. And that meant that the agenda of the slaveholding states would rule. And this immediately became apparent in the very first session of Congress that met in 1790. One of the first acts that was passed was a Fugitive Slave Act, which said that a slaveholder who had a slave that escaped, if they went to Massachusetts, for example, the slaveholder would have the right to go to Massachusetts and return that slave to the slaveholding state. And this became a real problem over time. So the 3/5 rule, what magnified the problem, and the framers didn't realize this, but just a decade or so after the ratification of the Constitution, is that Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, and the amount of acreage planted with cotton grew explosively. So instead of just thousands of acres, there were now millions of acres being cultivated for cotton, because the cotton gin and being able to pick the seeds out of cotton, enabled a huge textile industry to grow. Unfortunately, while the picking of the seeds out of the cotton was mechanized with the cotton gin, the cotton still had to be picked by hand, by slaves. So that resulted in literally millions of slaves coming into the United States, between 1800 and 1860 at the dawn of the Civil War. And all of these people were counted as 3/5 of a person. So it just tilted everything out of whack, and it never could be. And what happened were there were battles over, as the country expanded, there became battles over which states would be slave states and which states would be free states. So that's why you had in a state like Kansas, you literally had a civil war, prior to the Civil War that started in 1860. During the 1850s, there were equal factions of slaveholders and anti-slavery factions, and they literally went to civil war over each other and killed off each other because Kansas held the balance of, if Kansas became a slave state, it would just make the slave state stronger, but if it was a non-slave state, it would help the non-slave states, because the House of Representatives was fairly evenly balanced, although still favoring the slave states. So as you can see, the 3/5 rule and apportionment was really a major cause of the American Civil War.
Wow, so tensions ratcheted up over the math for
Yes,
many decades.
that drove that, and it drives it today. It really drives it today. You look at the divisions between at the time of in 1930, when the last Apportionment Act was filed. There were tensions that existed then. The tension this time was not between slave and non-slave states. It was between the equal division between rural and urban states. And in 1890, the United States became a little bit more urban than rural, and that trend has continued until today. And in 1912, the last time there was, in 1910, the 1910 census, the members of Congress suddenly realized that in 1910 they had to add 33 seats, which was an enormous number to add, to a body which had, about 370 seats at the time. The Republicans and Democrats became equally divided, equal numbers, and the Republicans realized, they tended to be in rural states, they realized that all the new people were coming into urban areas like Detroit to make cars, or the industrial Northeast, and they tended to vote Democrat. And so the Republicans saw that if they reapportioned in 1920, they realized that if they reapportioned, it would shift control of Congress from the Republican Party to the Democrat Party. So that's why apportionment stalled for a number of years, and until a compromise was reached in 1929. Mm-hmm. But these fights have always happened. The fights today are really between red states and blue states, which you see even as I speak.
And so now we have 435 members of Congress?
Yes, we do.
And how is the math done?
There's actually been 5 methods, mathematical methods that Congress has used over the years. One method was to round up. So thinking of the numbers 5 and 6, you would round up to the number 6. Another method was a round down, round down to the number 5. And then a third method was basically to take an average of 5 and 6, 5.5, by adding, what you do in 5th grade math. You add 5 plus 6, you get 11, divide that by 2, and you get 5.5. So that was a method. That was a method that was used. But folks, representatives quickly realized that just changing the divisor a tiny little bit would mean a changing of seats. And one of the very first people to discover this was James Polk, who became president during the Mexican War. Well, before that, he was a member of Congress from the state of Tennessee. And what he did was he realized that if he changed the divisor just a little bit for his home state of Tennessee, that he could add 1 representative to the state of Tennessee. So he did that and got away with it. But the next time apportionment came up, there were over 100 proposals to change the divisors a little bit in every single state, because they realized what Polk had done. The method that Congress uses was actually created by a couple of professors from Harvard, It's called the method of equal proportions, and basically it uses a mathematical formula to determine what's called a priority number. And so the 435 seats are the first priority numbers that are assigned are to the 50 states, because every state has to have one representative. And then what the method of equal proportions does is it takes the population of the largest states, or it goes by population. So the states with the largest populations, they are next assigned numbers. So California and Texas, they are assigned seats first, and then smaller and smaller seats are assigned seats later on in the process. Massachusetts is kind of in the middle of the pack, and then the assignment of seats, goes on and on until you reach the 435th seat. The Census Bureau actually publishes the priority list for 440 seats. But it's important because the first seats that are assigned are to California and Texas and then Florida. But as the priority numbers head more and more towards 435, the seats, the seats are assigned again to the states with the largest population left after seats are initially assigned. It's hard to explain, but if you go to the United States Census Bureau site, it would explain the method of equal proportions. They do a very good job at explaining it. And it is the Census Bureau that does the actual calculations and the actual assignments.
Mm-hmm. So James Polk wasn't the only one who did a little electoral shenanigans. There's a thing that we learn in school called gerrymandering as well.
Yes.
Can you speak to that? And
yes.
And
yes.
where that came from?
Well, there's always been gerrymandering. The gerrymandering originated in Massachusetts, and the governor of Massachusetts during 1812 was a non-federalist. They call it the Democrat-Republican Party, I believe, at that time. But Eldridge Gerry was governor of Massachusetts, and what he did was he created a Senate district along what is today the North Shore of Massachusetts, which would be towns like Gloucester and Salem, Essex County. And what he did was he redistricted all the Senate seats, but that seat in particular, it looked like a salamander, according to his critics. And it did. It kind of like snake-like or salamander-like curved over a portion of Essex County, which included Gloucester and those other towns. So his critics said it looked like a salamander, and then somebody came up with the idea of, oh, it's a gerrymander. And so the term gerrymander has stuck ever since that time. But prior to 1812, even before the United States became a country, it was still a colony of England, there was gerrymandering at that time. It's been a long accepted practice. It's just gerrymandering today is the distinction that needs to be made is for the purposes of our apportionment, or my apportionment book, is prior to 1912, every 10 years when the census was done, prior to 1912, the number of members of Congress went up each and every decade, with the exception of the 1840 census, where it went down a little bit. So everybody knew that the country was growing and that the number of representatives would increase. So gerrymandering occurred, and it occurred prior to 1912 the way it does today. Is in all but 9 or 10 states, the majority party in the state legislature, they draw the maps. So in Massachusetts, because the Democrat Party has a supermajority, the Democrats draw the maps. And that's the case in all but, I believe, 9 states. So the legislatures, they draw the maps. And prior to 1912, all of the legislatures drew the maps. There were no independent commissions or anything like that, or nonpartisan bodies, of which there are in a few states. So, but the goal was to keep the party in power, but the way they did it was that they would tend to draw maps where they would try to win the districts that they knew that they could win by a margin of between 1 and 10%. And I have looked at electoral results of the state of Ohio in 1880, and if you look at that, there are roughly 20 districts, and a majority of those districts, the margin of victory was generally under 5%, usually less than a couple thousand votes. And that was by design. That was how gerrymandering worked. The majority party wanted to win as many seats as possible, and they did that through trying to make the margins as tight as possible, and it worked. Now, since 1912, what the trend has been is that instead of a seat being, knowing that you're going to have more seats to deal with in the future, a seat has become scarce because the number of 435 has been fixed. And that has made a profound difference as to how redistricting works. And it really is what is driving the dispute in the Texas legislature right now. Individual representatives are scarce. And what does that mean for gerrymandering? Well, what happened was in the first few decades after 1912, party operatives would go out and they would try to draw the lines, pretty much prior to 1912. They tried to get a majority, but they did it with paper and pencil, and starting in the 1980s and with the 1990 census, there evolved software which could drill down using voting lists. It could literally drill down to the nearest house within a congressional district. And what this did was, because seats are now scarce, is that these software programs, and it was done by both parties. It was done by the Republicans first, but the Democrats also started to do it. So now, instead of assigning a party operative, I think this town looks like a Democrat town, or this town looks like a Republican town, so we're gonna include this town in the map, or we're going to exclude that town on the map because we think that they're going to vote our way or against us. Well, now it goes literally house by house and street by street, which is in part why you have these crazy shapes, that look that are just terrible. It really is just terrible for the average voter, because what the parties are doing is they are selecting the voters that they want in order to keep their district. And the interests of the public at large, it's really their interests be damned. The framers really wanted compact districts, and that is not the case anymore. You have crazy shaped districts. So what evolved were districts, and again, both parties do it, but you had the Republicans in Ohio. They created what was called the mistake by the lake, and it's essentially a congressional district that goes from roughly Toledo, Ohio, to the border with Indiana, and it's shaped like a snake, and it's along Lake Erie. That's the lake, and in some places the district is as narrow as the beach itself. And it just and it expands and gets narrow according to whether there are Republicans there or not, and it's so you have districts like that in Texas today. One of the proposals is to try to split the cities of Austin and Dallas into multiple districts, as many as 4 or 5 districts, rather than having Democratic enclaves within those cities. So that is really what is driving gerrymandering today. It's really the interest of the parties hanging on to the seats that are scarce and are not going to grow. If you all of a sudden had, say, 700 or 800 members of Congress, we would go back to gerrymandering the way that it used to be, where you'd be looking for a small majority. The overall solution, though, is what has been done in California, and this is really one of the reasons why I wanted to do this interview, is that California has a nonpartisan independent commission determine their districts, and it's very, very fair. A few other states do it as well. Virginia and Arizona are 2 states. They have independent commissions draw up the districts, and they have districts that are relatively compact, reasonable shapes, and it has a diversity of voters, and you really have in Arizona and Virginia, because of that, and to a certain extent in California, you have more wide open races between the parties, which is the way it really should be. So that's really that is my take on gerrymandering, and what the public is not told about gerrymandering is, you never see it on CNN or Fox or any of the interviews. It's basically the politicians pointing fingers at each other, but it doesn't go. You never have any discussion over why districts are not compact, or why aren't we striving to have more members of the House of Representatives, which would eliminate the problems of gerrymandering. Having independent commissions, having compact districts, but instead, it is really, kind of the bad old ways on steroids is what we have today, and it really needs to come to an end, because what's going to happen is, if California adds seats, then probably another Republican state like Florida will add Republican seats, and then another state may add more Democrat seats. So it kind of becomes an arms race of seats, and the real losers are the average citizens, because they really have no say in this. The way the Supreme Court is constituted today, voting rights are really really favors legislators. The gerrymandering has been allowed. The Supreme Court has said that it's kind of a reprehensible practice, but it's legal. Voting rights, the Voting Rights Act has been diluted, so that means that there'll be less diversity in the future. So what we really do need is, on a nationwide basis, nonpartisan commissions doing the actual redistricting every 10 years.
So you think that the U.S. House of Representatives should add members?
Yes,
right?
yes, I
And
do.
we should have nonpartisan commissions
Yes.
in each state to eliminate the practice of gerrymandering as much as possible.
Yes.
Is there anything else that Congress can do to eliminate this reprehensible practice, as the Supreme Court put it, a reprehensible legal practice?
Congress has the authority to increase or decrease the number of members. They can do that by a simple majority vote, and I don't think most voters realize that. The Congress can really cure, the situation that's going on in Texas. Congress could meet, and they could decide to increase its membership all the way up to 11,050 members, all the way up to that number. And the low number is a proportional number. So it's greater than the 100 senators. But you could have a Congress as small as 150 representatives. The basic problem that has always been with apportionment is that the majority party, whether it's the Democrat Party or the Republican Party, they do not want to jeopardize their hold or their power while they are the majority party in control of Congress. That's been true whether it's been Democrat majority or a Republican majority. The Apportionment Act of 1929, Congress wrangled for and did not reapportion after the 1920 census, because the Republicans who were in control at that time, it was really a lot about like the way the situation is today. The Republicans were holding on to Congress by a small majority, and they saw that reapportionment in 1920 would, that the seats would probably most likely be Democrat seats. So they really let the apportionment issue fester. And the Apportionment Act of 1929 came about. It was a compromise. And it's because everybody realized that, that if the reapportionment did not occur in time for the 1930 census, there would be a crisis. It already was a crisis. There were districts in the rural state of Missouri in the 1920s that had an average of only 330,000 people. There were districts that had grown in Michigan and California, in part because of the automobile industry in Michigan. There were districts, a few districts that had over 1 million people each in those districts. Really a tremendous disparity in numbers. And the Democrat citizens of those states, they actually held some protests saying, we're underrepresented. We need to be represented. They really, and so Congress did pass this Apportionment Act of 1929, which allowed for redistricting in 1930. But unfortunately, what it did was it kept the number of seats at 435, and it also, the terrible feature of the 1929 Act was that basically it allows Congress to come to an agreement about increasing the number of seats. Congress can do that, but Congress has always struggled to do that ever since the founding of this country, and Congress has not touched the issue of apportionment because it's too explosive. It's an issue of power, and so the Apportionment Act of 1929 and a later act further refining it, the Apportionment Act of 1941, it basically said, well, if you can't come to an agreement, Congress, if you can't come to an agreement, the number defaults back to 435 members, and that has been the case ever since 1929. Is the number has always defaulted back to 435. The difference between decades ago and today is that it just automatically defaults to 435 members because nobody in Congress even tries to change the number of representatives. There is a bill, there has been a bill filed by a Democrat representative from Oregon, which would increase the size of the House to somewhere around 780 members. That bill, although filed, has generated no support at all. I can also give the example, a personal example of my book. I've sent my book to at least 20 members of Congress. And I've also sent the book to members of state legislatures who are involved in redistricting. I've not received one response from the book, about the book from any member of Congress. I even sent a copy of this book to my own member of Congress, Congressman McGovern. Again, no response from him or his office. It's obvious to me that there is no appetite whatsoever to increase or change the number of representatives to Congress. And that's in part why I wrote the book. There really needs to be a national dialogue about apportionment, and that dialogue has not occurred since the 1920s, almost a century ago.
Is there anything that people can do?
I think that there are unfortunately very, very few options. One option is to pass a constitutional amendment, but constitutional amendments today are almost impossible to pass. All you have to do is look at the Equal Rights Amendment, which makes the right of women equal to men. That effort has been underway for over 100 years, and it is not. It's not passed as a constitutional amendment. You could have an effort to pass a constitutional amendment concerning apportionment, but again, it'd be like the fate of the Equal Rights Amendment. I think it would take a long, long time to pass. I think the only hope of change is at the local level. There are citizens who are concerned about their individual state, And individual citizens have brought lawsuits successfully in states like Pennsylvania and North Carolina. And citizens really do care at the state level. And I think that change, if it is to come, will probably be an effort to do what was done in California and Virginia and in Arizona, and that is to create nonpartisan commissions that do the actual redistricting. If that is done, and if that is done eventually in all 50 states, then many of the problems that have been created by apportionment will go away. It's a terrible problem. It's a terrible problem both as Congress as an institution, and also the place of our country in the world has been greatly affected by apportionment. When you look, what happened in 1912 really changed everything. It really changed everything by keeping the number, by keeping the number of 435. What has happened? Well, you can see that you have really only wealthy people tend to be members of Congress as opposed to ordinary people. But policy differences are changed as well. The money is no longer backed by gold. Well, that probably would not have happened prior to 1912. Corporations, the power of corporations has greatly increased since 1912. Corporations are now viewed as people. Prior to 1912, particularly the framers, they looked at corporations as things without rights, just a piece of property. Now corporations have all the rights of people. And this is probably one result of apportionment. Another result, and I wrote a book on the subject, is about neutrality. Prior to 1912, and certainly into the 1930s and up until World War II, neutrality, the United States being a neutral country, was very much a very important issue. And Congress did not dare touch or change the issue of neutrality. That has changed since then. Instead of strict non-intervention in other countries, since 1912, and particularly since 1950, the United States has intervened in countries all over the world, something which would have been unthinkable to George Washington and John Adams and James Madison, unthinkable to them. But in part, this is allowed because the war powers of Congress have really been diluted and changed, from the intent of the majority of the people. It is, Congress really doesn't exercise its war powers anymore. It's really more of an executive authority. And I think when you look at a country like Iran, which was the first country overthrown or intervened, that probably wouldn't have happened prior to 1912. It definitely would not have happened. But we've had interventions in 30 or 40 countries since 1912 at a huge cost. So there are all these issues that apportionment, I believe, is at the root of all of these issues.
So it's caused a lot of problems that we're still dealing with today, and perhaps the idea of war neutrality and corporations and the power of them are topics for another conversation.
Yes, yes. But hopefully it's a topic of conversation, a national dialogue in the context of apportionment.
Well, on that note, thank you for being here, Nowell, and educating us on apportionment. I've learned a lot. I hope our folks watching have learned a lot, and thank you for watching and listening to this excellent overview of apportionment by Nowell Francis.
Thank you very much.
Why don't you show everybody your book again?
Sure. This is the book. If you notice on the book, it has, it's hard to see, but I actually place on the book the shape, the awful shape of gerrymandered districts on the book, including the mistake by the lake.
All right. Thank you, Nowell.